Good day everyone, and welcome to the channel. It's Londononion here with a Back 4 Blood weapons review. And in this review, we're going to be looking at our second SMG, the UMP45. Now, although the stats and specs of the weapon speak for themselves, I will be giving my evaluation on the weapon's capabilities in combat. This will involve tactics that suit the weapon's strengths, my conclusive opinion, and an overall score. Now, evaluation will take place on 4 main fronts: ammunition economy, crowd control, mutation deterrence, and pressure combat. Before we get started though, it is important to note that a weapon's shortcomings can be supplemented with one's card selection, but evaluation will mainly be geared toward the weapon's base attributes. Additionally, one's character choice can make weapons somewhat more forgiving, meanwhile difficulty selection can either accentuate or soften the downsides. So starting off with the UMP's ammunition economy, which is essentially how long a weapon can practically last throughout a given level. The UMP is a relatively high damage automatic SMG. In fact, in its class, it has the highest damage numbers shot for shot, and is comparable in firepower to its bigger brothers, the assault rifles. Now, I know the firepower numbers seem to have a non-linear damage determination, but generally, higher firepower is correlated with higher damage numbers. Now, although the weapon is automatic, the fire rate is the lowest of its other SMG counterparts. With that said though, the fire rate is easily controllable, allowing one to perform single shots with relative ease when compared with other SMGs. With each shot within the maximum effective range, the UMP inflicts 13 units of damage. The range that it is most effective, however, is 11 meters. This is just outside of what I consider to be the danger zone when dealing with mutations. The damage numbers will begin to recede when the range is increased, which will only demand more ammo. A compensation for this is the controllability of the weapon. When firing automatically, the UMP is very easy to control, only requiring a slight downward adjustment to stay on target. This will allow one to be less conservative while maintaining good shot-to-hit ratio. However, as an SMG, the damage is naturally less than ideal. Plus, without damage buffs, the UMP will require 2 to 4 shots per ridden, depending on range. Corruption cards only make this worse. The UMP, in other words, should be used within its element to optimize its potential. Closer range, though, will likely lead to automatic fire, so this is up to the user as to how one wishes to use the weapon. Usually, the use of maximum fire rate is for the purposes of crowd control, which will be our next discussion. Depending on one's corruption cards and main events in a given stage, crowd control will be more or less an important constituent in one's survival. Higher difficulties will likely create a greater need for effective crowd control. The UMP shot for shot is the highest damaging SMG. At the same time though, it is on the lower side for magazine capacity with only 20 rounds. In regards to crowd control, this is a balancing combo. Not particularly great, but not bad either. However, crowd control is more than just damage and mag capacity. As we had previously discussed, the UMP's effective range is 11 meters for maximum damage. Additionally, each ridden will require at least 2 rounds for elimination at the correct range. Now, an important aspect to consider is bullet penetration, which is only 3.2 damage units for a subsequent target. This is somewhat useful damage, but nowhere near enough for a clean kill with just 2 rounds. This only gets worse with increased range. The reload speed is approximately 3 seconds before the weapon is trigger ready. As for the hip fire accuracy, the crosshairs move radically when fired from the hip. This is not to say that it is completely unreliable, but a disadvantageous use of the weapon. Since the UMP only has 20 rounds, I personally wouldn't recommend the tactic outside of point-blank range. When engaging in a run-and-gun style, which Back 4 Blood will demand throughout its campaign, the mobility of the UMP is above average, which will minimize stress on controlled fire while in a fast-paced situation. Sometimes, the need for crowd control is due to a lack of effective pressure combat and mutation deterrence, which we will cover next. Pressure combat, as I coined the term, refers to how efficiently a weapon can eliminate targets in multiple areas, or how well a weapon can complement one's ability to engage and eliminate multiple scattered targets at varying ranges. Now, after discussing the UMP's effective range, damage, control, and mag capacity, it has some efficacy in pressure combat, but is limited by the effective range, which will only add stress as enemies close in without critical shots. Technically, no weapon can sustain pressure combat indefinitely, but each weapon has their own efficacy in this regard. If factoring in ferocious and monstrous corruption cards, more controlled use of the weapon will be required to maximize longevity. Ignoring corruption cards, the UMP with semi-perfect use can eliminate 10 ridden per mag. This is an SMG after all. It thrives in close-range combat, but is less forgiving where there is a blunder. But with the mobility level, defensive firing, which I will call backpedaling while firing, is a viable option. Although the weapon is easily capable of long-range shooting accompanied by single shots, this will likely lead to an inefficient use of ammo. Effective pressure combat begins at close to mid-range. As for Mutation Deterrence, I would argue that it is probably one of the more important aspects of surviving in Back 4 Blood, and I would say there are 3 main strategies weapons can fall into in addressing them. There is kiting, fighting, or a discriminate mix of the two. Kiting involves tactically retreating from an enemy to put oneself and other teammates in an advantageous position to eliminate them and also render their attacks less or completely ineffective. Fighting in this circumstance, moreover, is geared toward holding one's ground while applying heavy fire and eliminating a given target before they can do much damage, if any at all. For the UMP, I would say that kiting will be the main strategy when facing off with most mutations. The main reason behind this is that the UMP's damage and mag capacity make it an impractical weapon for standing up to mutations. Plus, the mobility is more attuned to defensive firing or backpedaling while firing. The UMP has some ability to stumble mutations, mainly spitters, hawkers, and stalkers, but without much consistency. The same goes for wretches. With that said, mutations should be kept at a mid-range distance. I'm typically not a fan of SMGs, but this one handles like an assault rifle, but with greater mobility and lower effective range. For an SMG, I would prefer if it had a greater mag size, but with the other specs of the weapon, I personally can't complain about its capabilities. I wouldn't call it a replacement for an assault rifle, but definitely one of those weapons that sits on the cusp, similar to the ranch rifle being on the cusp between the assault rifle class and the sniper rifle class. When fully kitted, the UMP is a formidable weapon, but it will always be a kiting weapon, which is not a bad thing. Moving on to the scoring, the weapon's ammo economy is in satisfactory range. Common ridden will take multiple shots depending on the range, but because of how controllable yet efficient the weapon is, I give it a 3 out of 5. Crowd control isn't bad, and if anything, where the weapon can excel. Its main detractor is the mag capacity, but the power balances this out. Even while on the move, given its mobility, controlled fire while dealing with multiple ridden is doable. Hip fire is limited in capability and is best reserved for point-blank range. Reload speed is satisfactory and penetration is also satisfactory, but it is limited with this weapon. Close range is the sweet range. Mid-range, however, is doable. So I give it a 3 out of 5. Pressure combat and mutation deterrence is again an area of satisfactory performance. Pressure isn't too difficult with no enemy toughening corruption cards, otherwise the weapon has a greater chance of struggling. As for mutations, distance is crucial, especially with tall boys and berserkers. They should be alright, but the only mutation this weapon can consistently stand up to are the hawkers, spitters, and stalkers. Everything else is best kept at a distance. This becomes worse with corruption cards, so I give it in total a 6 out of 10. And overall, this will amalgamate to a 12 out of 20. But that concludes the review. Thank you guys for joining me on this one, and I will see you in the next review, where we will be covering the AA-12 shotgun. It's been Londononion, and I will see you guys next time.